Oh, goody. We are going to deal with a familiar face on this show, Kyle Kulinski. Yet again, old Kremlin Kyle is crying foul as the Biden administration begins to enact its foreign policy. You already know who Kyle is. Let's just get this over with. So a couple days ago, Kyle Kulinski made a video titled, "Is Biden Already Being Too Hawkish?" The obvious answer to that is no, but I think we all know that's not Kyle's takeaway from it. So, grab the whips. Let's begin.
So we have some eyebrow-raising stuff from the Biden administration on foreign policy. This is from I-24 News. They say the following. A convoy of 40 trucks and armor vehicles said to have entered Syria from Iraq. A large U.S. military convoy entered northeastern Syria on Thursday, Syrian state news agency Sana reports, citing sources on the ground. According to the report, the convoy included some 40 trucks and armored vehicles and was backed from the air by helicopters. It entered Syria from Iraq via the Al-Walid crossing to bring arms and logistical equipment to the bases in, I don't know how to pronounce that, and Deir ez-Zor provinces. Other local media report that such maneuvers are not unusual, as the U.S. often transfers equipment between Iraq and Syria.
Oh boy. I remember when this story broke, and the isolationist and non-interventionist factions of Twitter went absolutely nuts. So here's what happened. Troop movements between Iraq and Syria involving the United States are not uncommon. We have military forces working in that region to fight against the Islamic State. Obviously, there's going to be troop movements back and forth. And on Biden's first day in office, or shortly after, a convoy of 40 U.S. military trucks moved from Iraq to Syria as part of a resupply mission. That is it. That is the whole story. They didn't invade Syria. They didn't attack anyone. They didn't start new war. All they did was move troops from point A to point B. That is the whole story. But, of course, this is Kyle, so he reads into it way too much. Any troop movement to him in Syria is Biden starting another war, or doing an offensive illegal war against a country that didn't attack us. This is what the isolationists, this is how paranoid they are. You can't even fucking move troops back and forth without them thinking that you're starting another war with another country. And frankly, even if Biden was invading Syria, that would actually be a good thing, because the Assad government has been committing genocide and crimes against humanity for far too long now. The Syrian civil war is about to enter its 10th year, and this absolute schmuck thinks that Assad should still be allowed to remain in power after 500,000 people have been slaughtered, after the entire region of Syria and the surrounding countries have been completely destabilized. He really thinks that Syria would be better under an Assad regime, and if the U.S. just packed up and fucking left. This guy is unbelievably naive.
So they continue and they say the following. At the same time, Sana also reports that some 200 U.S. troops arrived in another province on helicopters. According to the report, the troops are set to deploy on the nearby oil fields with Kurdish-controlled eastern Syria, rich in energy resources. Okay, so I think there's the crux of the story.
Ooh, how nefarious. U.S. troops are being deployed to Kurdish territory? Ooh, fancy that. Now, of course, because Kyle is Kyle, he thinks that we're there for the oil. Of course, he neglected to mention that part of the story that mentioned they were Kurdish-held oil fields. Not Assad-held, Kurdish-held. Why would the United States send troops to Kurdish territory? Could it be because we have been allied with the Kurds in the fight against the Islamic State? Could it be because we have worked together and after Trump abandoned them, maybe Biden is trying to fix that broken relationship by sending troops back to assist them? But now, a logical person would say, yes, that's the reason we're sending troops there. we're sending them to help the Kurds and reestablish the alliance that Donald Trump destroyed. But, of course, this is Kyle, so he fucks it up. Instead of focusing on that aspect of the story, he focuses on the oil. So he can find his excuse to dismiss the entire operation in and of itself as just more wars for oil and endless war, for the military-industrial complex. This guy is a joke.
Now, this is not in any way, shape, or form to absolve Trump and his administration, because the fact of the matter is, Trump admitted it on live TV. He came out there and said, we're gonna make sure that we get the oil. We need to grab the oil. We should have taken the oil in Iraq. What we're gonna do is move some troops around and protect the oil in Syria. I mean, he said this. He said it a number of times. He used to say it all the time in regards to Iraq. And then as president, there were reports that he was protecting the oil in Syria, which is more code word for we're going to jack the oil in Syria.
Oh, God. What Donald Trump says and what U.S. foreign policy actually is are two very different things. Donald Trump didn't understand the first fucking thing about Syria. And of course, Kyle yet again neglects to mention that Donald Trump abandoned the Kurds in Syria and didn't take the oil with them. So if we were there for oil, why did we just pack up and leave?
So Trump was doing that. Now, here we have a situation where I guess they pulled out for a while from certain regions, and then now, Biden takes office, and now they're going right back to those oil fields.
I love how he just glosses over the fact that we pulled out of there for a little while, in his words. Yeah, we fucking abandoned the Kurds to be slaughtered by the Turks. And now Biden is very reasonably and very correctly trying to undo that atrocious foreign policy decision made by the Trump administration. A normal, functioning person would look at this and say, yes, this is a good thing. We should be there to stop a fucking genocide from happening in Syria. But Kyle doesn't give a shit about genocide. He is an isolationist, and he is a non-interventionist. So of course he will gloss right over that aspect of the story and continue to focus on his bullshit narrative of calling our intervention in Syria completely around protecting the oil. This jackass is a joke.
If you ask me about the mechanics of it, I cannot tell you, because you would need to be in the room and in the conversation and part of certain government agencies in order to know what's really going on here. Like, is it part of the mechanisms of government that were, like, the wheels were already in motion and Biden comes in and that's part of what was already laid out to happen from the previous administration? Or is it that Biden came in and at some point within the first day or two, he got in contact with certain government agencies and was like, okay, now do the thing in Syria where you go back to the oil fields? I don't know. I don't know the mechanics of it. But bottom line is, we can all look at this and very clearly say, not a good idea. I don't think this is a good idea.
No, Kyle, you might be able to look at that and say, not a good idea, but any reasonable person would look at this troop movement and say, this is an excellent idea. This is a great idea. If we are working to promote human rights and stability in that region, this is the best move you can do. We are supporting the allies we previously abandoned. We are stopping a genocide that we almost enabled to happen. But yet again, I keep mentioning this, Kyle doesn't give a shit about that. Kyle is one of the worst types of nationalists I've ever seen. The ones that cloak themselves in the language of progressivism and human rights and liberalism. They are not liberal, they are not progressive, and they don't give a shit about this altruistic self-indulgence that they coat themselves with. It's disgusting. These people are absolutely disgusting.
Now, apparently there was also an attack in Iraq where about 30 people were killed. It was a suicide bombing. The speculation is that it was ISIS. If I'm not mistaken, it was in a Shia majority region. And so now there's whispers about, like, hey, should we increase troop levels even more in Iraq? And by the way, people are giving Trump credit and they're wrong to do so. They're acting like he pulled out the troops. He didn't pull out the troops. He still has left thousands of troops in the Middle East.
Finally, Kyle actually gets something right. Donald Trump did not pull out of the Middle East. But then again, he abandoned the Kurds. That was the problem. But of course, Kyle doesn't take issue with that. He takes issue with the fact that we have any troops left in the Middle East at all. Kyle, that's not what we give Trump credit for. We don't give him credit for just leaving the troops there. I don't give him any credit for what happened in Syria. The only thing he did in Syria that I really agreed with was airstriking Assad after the chemical attacks. But now, of course, Kyle is worried that because the incident in Baghdad has clearly shown that Iraq is far from finished in the fight against ISIS, that we might actually go back and continue fighting the terrorist groups. Because Kyle, if it was up to Kyle, we would just pull out of there, leave all those people at the mercy of ISIS and a resurgent caliphate. Well, that you're free, Mr. Kulinski, to believe that. But I am also free to call out your illiberal policies when it comes to foreign policy.
So, he yo-yoed them a little bit, like the levels went up, down, up, down, up, down. Well, that's exactly what Obama did. And ultimately, when Obama left office, we still had troops in the Middle East. When Trump left office, we still had troops in the Middle East.
Gee, it's almost like conflicts don't give a shit who's actually president of the United States. It's almost like, immaterial of who's in charge in the U.S., conflicts overseas will still continue. Kyle is seeing connections where there are none, and this is, of course, nothing new.
But now the conversation is, hey, should maybe we take it from a few thousand to like 10 or 20,000? That's the conversation that's happening behind the scenes. Or to be fair, I don't know the exact number that they're considering taking it to. But, there hasn't been a decision made yet on that front when it comes to Iraq. And a lot of the speculation was premature because they were saying, oh, Biden's already going to send troops back in there. Not necessarily the case. The ones that are there are still there and probably will stay there. But what will happen, we don't know yet. We don't know if he's going to increase troop levels or decrease troop levels or whatever the case, or keep it the same. We don't know yet.
So here is actually something really funny. Kyle is outright admitting that he is completely speculating. He has no information, he has no solid data on what he is basing this information off of. He is just making shit up. He fucking admitted it himself. We don't know what the Biden administration's plan is. I hope it's to increase troops in the Middle East, to challenge the Assad regime and the Islamic State. I hope they increase them so that we can protect the Kurds and other minorities from the wrath of terrorist groups and hostile foreign powers. But that's just me, because I'm a liberal interventionist. Now, I know Kyle doesn't give a shit about that, but I do.
But because there was a terror attack, it does sort of give Biden an opening if he wants to say, okay, I guess we got to increase troop levels to maintain security or whatever. He can make such an argument.
Imagine looking at a terrorist attack and worrying not about the people harmed or about the regional security of that area, but worrying that it might give us an excuse to intervene. That's really telling, actually, because that shows that Kyle really doesn't give a shit about the people who live in Iraq and who live in Syria. He doesn't care about them at all. He only cares about the United States' involvement there. And that is a horribly illiberal thing to believe. To disregard the safety and the lives of others simply because they're not the same nationality as you. This guy is a progressive? Give me a fucking break.
But again, reserve judgment until you see what he actually does. We have to be fair. But in the case of Syria, yeah, this is probably not a good idea. This is probably not a good idea.
No, Kyle. This is a very good idea to send troops back into Syria. Did you see what happened when Donald Trump pulled our troops out? Did you see the utter carnage that followed? The instability, ISIS prisoners escaping, Kurds fighting for their lives as Turkey invaded northern Syria. You really looked at that and thought, oh, we should do more of that. We should pull completely out of there and leave the Kurds at the mercy of not just Turkey, but also Assad and ISIS. You would really abandon our allies just to pursue this non-interventionist bullshit? Give me a fucking break, Kyle. You are appalling.
And it's a shame because, when you get Republican administrations, as a general rule, they believe in hard power, which means not only do we want to use air power and drones, but we want boots on the ground as well, and we want to ground invade a bunch of places. And oftentimes when you get Democrats in power, you get soft power, which is we're good with the fighter jets and the drones, but yeah, okay, I guess we don't want to do ground invasions that much. But either way, it's like different wings of the imperialist spectrum.
Ooh, the I word, imperialist. Oh boy, I find it funny. I've often pointed this out. Non interventionists only use the term imperialist when referring to the United States and its allies. Kyle never mentions Russian imperialism in Syria or Iranian imperialism in Iraq and Syria. No, he doesn't give a shit about them because they're anti American. And that's really what it comes down to. Kyle Kulinski doesn't care about actual substance. He doesn't care about actual principled anti-imperialism. He is a mouthpiece for Russia, for Iran, for Syria, and he doesn't give a shit about the people there. He's just anti-American. It really is that simple.
And everybody agrees that we need to be the policemen of the world and we need to go all over the world. And that's a shame, and that's terrible. Now, a lot of people, again, are wrongly giving Trump credit for, not starting a new war. That's damning with faint praise to the max, because the fact of the matter is, when you look at his foreign policy record, it's overwhelmingly negative and overwhelmingly hawkish.
Oh, Kyle, I wish that I could say the same about Trump. You think Trump was hawkish? Are you kidding me? This guy was about as isolationist as you can possibly get. I mean, my God. If he thinks Trump is hawkish, I shudder to think what a Kulinski administration would look like in the White House. Can you imagine the carnage that will be wrought in the Middle East and overseas? Can you imagine the alliances that would be destroyed because of this man's impotence? Jesus fucking Christ.
432% increase on drone strikes, and Obama was already doing way too many drone strikes. And that increase was only in the first year, by the way. It probably went up even more in the subsequent years. So 432% increase in drone strikes, kept us in Iraq, kept us in Afghanistan, kept us in Syria as well, shuffled troops around from one place to another, but ultimately kept us in Syria. Aided and abetted the genocide in Yemen that Saudi Arabia was carrying out with our weapons.
Yet again, we see Kyle is only now giving a shit about genocide when it's involving a U.S. ally. And, I'll just say it up front. I am no fan of Saudi Arabia. I think the regime is absolutely appalling. I'm in favor of cutting off our alliance with Saudi Arabia unless they make major reforms, one of those reforms being pulling the fuck out of Yemen. But at the same time, this actually shows, yet again, how unprincipled Kyle Kulinski is. He's only willing to call out genocide when it makes the U.S. and one of its allies look bad. Now, someone like me, I call out genocide wherever I see it. I'm opposed to genocide in Yemen, but I'm also opposed to the genocide in Syria and in Xinjiang and in places like Ethiopia, Rwanda, and the Congo. These are areas where these are all areas where we should be fighting for innocent lives. But Kyle doesn't give a shit about them not because those don't make the U.S. look bad. All he cares about is making the U.S. look like the big, bad, mean, neocon, warmonger imperialist. But if Russia or one of their allies or assets are committing genocide, he will not speak a word.
These are not things that you praise the guy for. In fact, quite the opposite. He was terrible on foreign policy. He was incredibly hawkish on foreign policy. He listened to the neoconservative establishment on foreign policy.
Oh my God, this guy never fucking shuts up. Trump listened to the neoconservative establishment? Pretty much everything in that sentence is wrong. One, Trump never listened to anybody. Never. He was running this entire thing by himself, and that's why it was botched so fucking horribly. Two, he listened to the neoconservative establishment. He fired the only neocon in that administration, John Bolton. Now, some people could say Mike Pompeo is a neocon, but I don't really think he is. He didn't pursue interventionism in places where he should have. All he really did was, get tough on Iran, which is good. I'll give him credit for that. But even then, he didn't do all that much, just taking out a couple proxies.
I mean, probably the worst example, ripping up the Iran deal and assassinating a top commander, General Soleimani.
Oh, God. You're really going to take issue with Trump taking out Soleimani? Qasem Soleimani was the Reinhard Heydrich of the Middle East. He was responsible for tens of thousands of deaths. He posed a risk not only to U.S. interests in the region, but also to regional stability there as a whole. He helped arm and train terrorist organizations like Hezbollah, the Houthis, and many other Iranian proxies operating in that area that carry out terrorist attacks and murders in that region. Taking him out was one of the only good things the Trump administration did. And I find it funny that Kyle can somehow find the very few good things the Trump administration did and then shit on them.
You can't do that. I mean, he damn near started World War III, and then people want to give him praise for being a dove. It's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Oh dear, this argument again. World War III. Kyle, you really think that a third world war was going to start over the killing of one guy, one person? It would take a lot more than the killing of one military general to trigger a third world war with Iran. And I find it funny. These non-interventionists, they always whine about that. Oh, you don't do anything because my third world war. And every fucking time they say that something will result in World War III, it never happens. Every single time they get it wrong. So forgive me, Kyle, if I take issue with your bullshit predictions and your sub-average analysis of foreign policy when it comes to taking out Soleimani. You don't know jack shit about this. You don't know jack shit about world politics. You have no idea how the world works. And I thank God every day that you are not in a position of power.
So, yeah, no. It's the exact opposite. He deserves nothing but criticism. Now, with Biden, again, we're going to keep it real with you. Whatever he does, we will report it accordingly, and I'll tell you what I think of it. But in this case, whether it's the mechanisms of government and the wheels were already in motion that brought us here, or whether it's Biden who actively made the decision to bring us here with more troops in Syria because of the oil, it's terrible and they need to stop it. So anyway, here you go. Some of the first reports on foreign policy under the Biden administration. And lo and behold, it's bad.
What a weird roundabout way to end this video. As painful as it was to watch, this video actually really shows what kind of person Kyle Kulinski is. He doesn't give a shit about human rights or about geopolitical crises. All he wants is for the US to stick its head in the sand and pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist. Now, our foreign policy was essentially that for the past 4 years. And the damage caused by such a foreign policy will take decades to repair. And I do not understand how these non-interventionists can still, after all this time, after all these geopolitical crises, still think that the US can afford to turn its back on the world. Isolationism is really a childish and immature foreign policy. It's naive. It doesn't have any hard backing to it. It's just wishful thinking. That's it. And I'm glad. One of the reasons I'm so glad Biden won is because we are finally leaving behind isolationism and non-interventionism as a coherent foreign policy. And it should be. Isolationism and non-interventionism led to the genocide in Rwanda. They led to the civil war in Syria. They led to the Congo wars. Non-interventionism and isolationism have a track record of bloodshed, violence, cynicism, and death. And the sooner that we cast those ideologies into the